Right, I think we've got most people here. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. My name's Abby Wood and I'm Chief Executive of AGK London. It's great to have so many people joining us virtually today for what I hope will be a really interesting discussion. Amongst the 3,000 or so people who have signed up to attend this event, we've got representatives from a wide range of older Londoners groups, and we've also got individual attendees from every single borough in London. If you'd like to introduce yourself to everyone, then you can do so in the chat function, which you should see on the side of the screen. I'm pleased to be joined by a really excellent panel of speakers. We have two of the candidates running to be the next Mayor of London, Shaun from the Green Party and Luisa Porritt from the Liberal Democrats. Unfortunately, the Labour and Conservative candidates were unable to attend today. So representing the Conservative candidate, Shaun, we have the MP for the Cities of London and Westminster, Nickie Aiken, and representing the Labour candidate and current Mayor, Sadiq, we have Karen Buck, the MP for Westminster North. Thank you all very much for being here. There are 2.5 million people aged 50 or over living in London, and around a third of the votes cast in the upcoming London elections will be cast by older Londoners. So AGK London wanted to bring together the main candidates to answer questions directly from older people living in the city. This election for the next Mayor of London comes at a difficult time. The pandemic's had a devastating effect on the quality of life of many older Londoners. Too many older people have been cut off from their friends and family, faced barriers to engaging with vital community services, struggled to access food and essentials, and many have seen their health, mental and physical health decline. These challenges have disproportionately affected those on low incomes, people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, those with a long-term condition or dementia, and older disabled Londoners. Alongside the challenges that they face, the next Mayor of London cannot ignore the contribution of older Londoners. As volunteers, carers, community leaders and active citizens, older Londoners play a vital role in this city. Through paid work alone, older Londoners contribute at least 47 billion to the capital's economy, and they're also the age group most likely to volunteer their time to help others. I'm really proud to be launching AGK London's manifesto for the upcoming elections today. Our manifesto contains 24 asks for the next Mayor, and these asks cover 9 areas of action, which, if implemented, will make a significant contribution to making our city more age-friendly. In the manifesto, we sought to prioritise what older Londoners have been telling us over the last 12 months and apply these to the specific powers that the Mayor has. The profound challenges facing a post-pandemic London are complex, and our manifesto is about putting older Londoners at the heart of a recovery. There's also a bigger picture. From social isolation to digital inclusion, the pandemic has highlighted and all too often exacerbated challenges which many older Londoners have already been facing for years. Just after this election, it will be 3 years since London joined the global network of age-friendly cities and communities. Recovery actions must contribute to the Age-Friendly London programme, and we're calling on the new Mayor to renew their commitment and redouble their efforts in this work. The 23 local AGKs in London cover almost every borough in the city, and the staff and volunteers there have worked tirelessly over the past year and before that to support hundreds of thousands of older people and to be there for their communities when they needed them most. The manifesto leads with asks in the areas of mental health and well-being, digital exclusion, and access to healthy food. These are the areas that have been identified by AGKs themselves as the biggest challenges facing those that they support. Along with the experiences of local AGKs during the crisis, the manifesto draws on what older Londoners have told us since just before and throughout the pandemic. AGK London is pleased to be one of a number of organisations calling for the next Mayor to take tangible steps to improve the lives of older Londoners during this election. I'm delighted that the manifesto is supported by the Greater London Forum for Older People, Opening Doors London, and Positive Ageing in London. I believe we're stronger when we work together, and AGK London is proud to be a member of the London Age Friendly Forum. Our hope for this manifesto is that it will make those running for Mayor reflect on the importance of issues they may not have thought deeply about before. Action to make London more age-friendly is action that makes London more welcoming, more inclusive, more vibrant and more sustainable. That of course benefits the older Londoners of today, but it also benefits the older Londoners of tomorrow and society as a whole. If you're someone that uses Twitter, then you might want to join in the conversation that will be going on Twitter during this event. We're using the hashtag Older Londoners Hustings, if you'd like to join in the discussion there. I can see there's also lots of discussion going on in the chat already. Before we move on to questions from the audience, I'd like to invite each of the candidates to make a short opening statement. In the interest of fairness, we're going to go alphabetically by surname. So Nickie Aiken, representing Shaun Bailey, would you like to go first? Oh, I think you're on mute, Nickie. The phrase of the year.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Fine, thank you. Gosh, right. Thank you, Abby. And thanks to Age UK for organising today's hustings. And Shaun sends his sincere apologies and his best wishes for you all. First of all, I want to address my fellow older Londoners. We are at a crossroads and have a major decision to make. What do we want for this great city of ours? What are our aspirations and our hopes for ourselves and our families? To answer those questions, we must also ask, who do we trust to be the next Mayor of London to take forward our ambitions? We need a greener, fairer and more ambitious vision for our city, a Conservative vision, one that addresses and puts right the failures of the last 5 years. Sadly, over the past half a decade, Sadiq has failed to deliver on the majority of the promises he made us in 2016. Crime is up, homes are not being built as quickly as he promised, leaving even more families on the waiting list. Our transport network is on its knees and in eye-watering debt even before the effects of the current pandemic. The cost of the mayor is rising year on year and set to increase again and again, with Londoners forced to spend more of their hard-earned money to pay for Khan's string of mistakes and mismanagement. Londoners need and deserve better. London is an amazing city. It welcomes people from every corner of the globe. All of us, whatever our background, our age, our religion or none, our economic background, we are all one London. And that makes me incredibly proud, but also concerned about who will be our next mayor. London has been hit hard by the pandemic, and we have an opportunity now to boost the economy through a green recovery, protecting the environment and creating more jobs for us, our children and our grandchildren in more green industries. We need a mayor with a vision, a mayor with new ideas, a mayor with ambitious and achievable goals, a mayor for a fresh start. Shaun Bailey is the mayor we need. Thank you, Abby.
Thanks very much, Nickie. Next, I'm going to invite the Green candidate, Shaun Berry, to make her opening statement. Shaun.
Thank you so much. Am I unmuted? Excellent. Thank you so much for organising this. Age UK's manifesto is absolutely superb. It's full of really good policies. And I'm here to pitch for myself to be mayor. And I do believe that London could and should be the greenest city in the world, the one best prepared for the future. And we know that all the evidence shows Londoners are crying out for a new start, a real green recovery that raises everyone up, that creates a proper, secure future, one we can pass on to the next generations with pride. Now, I've worked as a London Assembly member for the Greens for 5 years with my colleague Caroline Russell. Even before the crisis, our reports, our work with campaigners, our casework told us that too many groups of Londoners were being ignored and left to slip through the cracks. And coronavirus has exposed some of the worst gaps in our systems. Our systems can be changed. Coronavirus has shown us what matters and that things can be different. Now, we've had an incredible response to the policies and ideas our team has launched so far from Londoners all across the city. And the best response was to my announcement that I'll appoint an Elders Champion in City Hall. And this is so important. Our Elders Champion will be tasked with prioritising the needs of older Londoners across the recovery on work, emotional well-being, health, economic security. And one of the first things we'll do is we'll work together to make all tube toilets free and install at least 32 new toilet blocks in Transport for London stations. This is an idea we, the Greens, put forwards in 2020 in an amendment to the Mayor's budget. It was hugely supported cross-party, but it's not yet been adopted by the current Mayor. Obviously, there's lots more ideas to come. Every week until May, we'll have more good ideas to show you, ideas that have come from Londoners who are thinking practically and planning for the new start we need. And our green values of bottom-up leadership will shine through all of this. I know I have a duty to respect everyone's rights, but I also promise to share my power with every Londoner as mayor, so that we can all, whatever our age, play our part in a real green recovery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shaun. And next we're going to hear from Karen Buck, representing the Labour candidate Sadiq Khan. Karen.
Thank you very much, Abby, and greetings from my glamorous office. And I send best wishes from Sadiq, who's very sorry that he can't be here with you this afternoon. We heard that there are over 2 million older Londoners. It always slightly amuses me that when we talk about young Londoners, they're a group that stretches just from childhood probably to 30 or so, and yet we think of older Londoners as everyone over 50. And of course, there is an enormous diversity of experience amongst older Londoners, 50-year-olds up to 90-plus-year-olds, and older Londoners also, that extraordinary diversity of every kind of life experience, people who were born in London, people who have arrived in London from all parts of the UK and from all over the world. We have gay and straight Londoners, black and white Londoners, Londoners of all religions, and none. And so when we talk about the manifesto for older Londoners, we're also talking about a vision for London and a record of delivery for London that embraces every single interest, because older Londoners in so many ways are no different from the profile of Londoners as a whole. And yet at the same time, what we've got to recognise is that we are also a city, in common with the rest of the country, that will increasingly be ageing, and that the number of older Londoners will increase by over 80% over the coming 30 years. So in addition to a delivery for London, we have also to make sure that we are increasingly age-proofing our city and making it a city in every way that older Londoners are comfortable to be in and to move about in. Now, obviously, I am here as a representative of the man who has been the Mayor of London for the last 5 years, difficult years, particularly this last year of COVID. But I am very proud on behalf of Sadiq of the record that we have achieved over these last few years. We have had the most ambitious programme in the world in terms of reducing toxic air pollution, seeing it reduced by 1/3. We have started more council house building than in any year since 1983, and we will no doubt be talking more about housing. We have frozen TfL fares and introduced the Hopper fare, saving Londoners money. We have stood up for London in the negotiations with the government on a fair funding deal for Transport for London, and there are an extra 1,000 police officers after a decade in which the government cut funding for policing, and we lost 21,000 police officers across the country. Sadiq stands up for London, champions London against all whose actions and words and decisions are not in London's interests. He reflects London's values. He is a fine mayor, and we will be delivering a manifesto in which we bring forward yet more policies, but some of those obviously we will be discussing as we respond to the questions.
Thank you very much, Karen. And finally, we'll hear from the Liberal Democrat candidate, Luisa Porritt.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you for all the brilliant work that Age UK does. The pandemic has hit older Londoners hard, especially being cut off from friends and family. But older people are also among those who've stepped up to help others during this crisis. Here in Camden, where I'm a councillor, Age UK's local branch stepped up for those shielding, and we're so grateful for your efforts. The Liberal Democrats are delighted to fully support your manifesto. We're the party for a more caring society, and at the heart of that is better respect and support for older people. My plan to take London forward focuses on the basic needs of Londoners: local jobs, decent homes, and clean air. I'm going to whiz you through all three, and I know we've got plenty of time for wider questions later. I'll start with local jobs. For me, this starts with the high street. London's high streets used to be at the centre of our communities. I want us to get back to those days. We can reinvent them with more things to do for people of all generations and create local jobs. Everyone deserves a decent home to live in. While much of the housing crisis has focused on how young people can't get onto the ladder, we also lack specialist housing for senior living and suitable properties for people to downsize to. I want to set up a London housing company to start taking control of delivering the homes we need directly. No more relying on deals with developers. It's time to deliver the homes all Londoners deserve. I know we've all felt inspired by the next generation calling for action to clean up our air. The most straightforward way the Mayor can help is by investing in a healthy, green public transport system. That system must be accessible to everyone. So we need more step-free stations and to keep concessions like the Freedom Pass. I know there are many other ways the Mayor can do more for older Londoners, from improving digital inclusion to better community policing. I hope we get to cover more of this in the questions to come. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Louisa. That was great. So we're now going to move on to questions from older Londoners themselves. We've got 5 questions, and because I think this is the first time for many of us that we've done a virtual hustings, I do ask for everyone's patience if it takes just a little bit longer than usual to do the virtual equivalent of passing someone the microphone or inviting them up to the stage. The first question that we have is from John Miles from Haringey. Hopefully we should see John appearing on the screen in just a moment. Oh, hello. John, would you like to ask your question? Hello, John. Lovely to see you. Would you like to ask your question? I think we might be having a few technical problems there. Oh, no, John's coming. Hello, John, can you hear us? I think, John, if you can just unmute yourself, then we'd love to hear your question. Oh, is someone in the team able to unmute John? Ah, here we go. John, I'm sorry about those difficulties. Okay, I think I've just been told that John's having some connectivity problems. So, oh, let's have one last go, otherwise I'll rejig the order. And hello, John, are you able to hear us?
I can hear you, Abby.
Wonderful. Would you be able to ask your question?
Yes, my apologies, everyone.
No,
What level of importance will the candidates give to improving the quantity and quality of public toilet provision?
Thank you, John. Can I invite, I'm going to rotate the order with every question so everyone gets an opportunity to go first. So on that basis, could I invite Shaun to respond first? And you've all got 2 minutes for your answers.
Yeah, so I think I slightly preempted this question with my original pitch. It's because I really do feel absolutely passionately about this. I think public spaces and the ability to go out without the fear of being trapped, you know, without finding a toilet it affects so many different people, and it's something we hear from Londoners all of the time. And one of the big gaps is that for no good reason really, it's not very expensive. Transport for London still charges for most of its public toilets within tube stations, and Network Rail stopped doing that about 2 years ago. And if you know, when you go on the real trains, there is now free toilets in all the stations. You don't have to pay 50p anymore. It's great. It's such a relief. And so yes, we made a plan to put 32 new toilet blocks into Transport for London stations, and when they're removing ticket halls, this makes perfect sense for them to do. We put it forward as a budget amendment. As an Assembly member, every year we get to put forwards amendments like that, and me and my colleague Caroline Russell put it forwards and costed it up, and it was totally affordable. We found, you know, you can't put a budget amendment forwards unless you found the money from somewhere. And all the parties stood up in the assembly and said, that's a good idea. And then the mayor didn't take up the amendment. Now, usually we have quite a big influence in London in the assembly. Often a year or two later, the mayor will bring it forwards as his own idea. But I think you should be really voting Green so you can get these things right the first time, quite honestly. And so, yeah, I'm totally passionate about this. And I want to make sure that we don't close public toilets that councils run. We know that councils are facing a budget squeeze. And in Camden, I fought off one attempt to make toilets be charged for before. I've helped people in Camden to make a fuss. That plan got dropped. Our toilets are still free. Almost all of them are still open. This is something that requires somebody who really cares about this in City Hall. And as an assembly member or as the mayor, you're totally on your side. It's so important to be able to get out without fear. And this is something that we've all felt during lockdown, the need to be able to go out and get your exercise and see your friends and family, not feel like you have to go on public transport, be able to walk, be able to wheel, be able to stay in the park as long as you can. All of those things are not possible if you don't have good access to toilets.
Thank you very much, Shaun. And now can we hear a response from Karen?
Thanks very much. Well, again, I think we're probably all going to reinforce the same message, which is that for many older Londoners, and of course many Londoners in other categories, being able to move around the city requires a number of provisions, and that includes being reasonably confident that where you go, you are going to be able to get access to a public toilet. And of course, over the years, we have lost a lot of toilet provision, and a lot of that is due to the fact that there has been such a massive pressure on public finances with huge cuts to local authority budgets over the last decade, and of course this enormous pressure on the London transport budget as well. But what Sadiq has done and recognises the key importance of this is to make sure this is specified in the London plan, the London plan being the development strategy for the city, which includes a commitment to making sure that when developments are under the planning stage, that toilet provision, free toilet provision is integral to the requirement of that planning. We can't be in a situation where we are allowing major new developments to happen in the city without building in a capacity for public toilets specifically, but of course more broadly issues of accessibility. And Sadiq has also made sure that he's used the Good Growth Fund to bring about the refurbishment and building of 250 new toilet facilities already. So he's shown in that a commitment to do that work, and through the London plan and other measures to take it forward. As we've said at the very beginning, we are a city that must adapt to an ageing population and make sure that facilities, including toilet facilities, are integral to that vision.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Karen. Next, Louisa, can we have your response to John's question?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for your question, John. Again, I'm not going to disagree on this one. I think it's absolutely got to be a priority. This is about dignity for people, for older Londoners, but for all Londoners, actually, and especially women. So we need to work to ensure that there is free public toilet provision in as many places as possible, whether that's in our parks, because we know that at various stages during the pandemic, in some parks, there were no public toilets that were accessible. So that excludes certain Londoners. And I think that's something we need to learn from in future. In our stations where they aren't all currently free. So it has to be a priority of the next Mayor of London to make sure that this is available free of charge, and also to work with businesses across the capital to try and make the provision of toilets available as well on premises, and so that people can use them when they need them. At London Bridge, in the refurbishment, free public toilets were made available then. So I don't see why we can't be looking at doing that elsewhere as part of the many upgrades that are needed to our tube stations and our public transport network more generally. But ultimately, I support what's in Age UK's manifesto to work with local boroughs, businesses and others to improve access across our capital in accordance with the London Plan policy.
Wonderful, thank you, Louisa. And in a sense, it's great to hear so much consensus about making progress on this issue. Nickie, can we hear from you?
Thanks, Abby. I also want to back what my fellow participants have said. I think it's really, really important that we ensure that there are more public toilets provision. As I get older, and I'm now in my 50s, I absolutely understand why you do need access to public toilets when you're out and about. And Shaun Bailey has promised that he will ensure that all TfL stations, where possible, will have public toilets. And he wants to, but again, it goes back to how do you pay for that? Because that's a huge budget to pay for new toilets or reopening toilets that are closed. And again, it goes back to being sensible with the budget and creating the opportunities to raise more money. And that's why he wants to introduce a London infrastructure bank that would sit under as a funding stream to be able to raise around about £10 billion that will then go towards upgrading stations. And as part of that, including new toilets. It's that type of fresh thinking, if you like, that we need for London. We can't keep thinking these great ideas, thinking about investing and improving services, which are desperately needed in London, without understanding how we pay for them, because we can't just expect Londoners to pay for them through their taxes. There's got to be more innovative ways of doing that. And I think Shaun's got a great idea with the London Infrastructure Bank, as well as working with private companies and marketing companies to look at sponsorship, because that is one way of raising really important, much needed money to invest back into our public services. Not about selling off our services, it never is. It's about a partnership to ensure that Londoners get the services they need of whatever age, but also they deserve. Thanks, Abby.
Great, thank you very much, Nickie. And now we're going to move on to the next topic, which is digital access. And we're going to have a question asked by Elizabeth Adebisi from Tower Hamlets. I believe Elizabeth is just logging in now. I've seen her, Elizabeth, I can see she's just appeared, but I think doesn't yet have her screen on. Elizabeth, are you with us?
Yes.
Elizabeth, welcome. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes. My question is, it has never been more explicit that there is a direct link between digital connectivity and physical, mental, and financial health. How did the candidates plan to make sure every older Londoner can access the internet in their own home, and within what time scale?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for that question. I think certainly the last year has really thrown the importance of this issue into quite stark relief. Karen, would you like to respond first?
Yes, happily. Thank you for that for that question. I mean, I think that it is absolutely right that we are now embracing the fact that we are in a we're in a digital world, and although I'll come back and make a mention of the fact that not everybody can be included in this, it is a digital divide that excludes a number of Londoners, either because they don't have the financial capacity to be linked up to the internet themselves, or because they are not yet given the skills to be able to work in the digital world, is something that is going to increase existing patterns of inequality. And we know, of course, that the people who are most likely to be excluded from digital access are going to be they are older Londoners, people with disabilities, and Black and minority ethnic communities in particular, and that we have far too many Londoners, 17% of our Londoners are inner Londoners are living in poverty. So they are people who are most likely to be excluded. So the work that Sadiq's been doing on this around digital access has been around the programme for access to digital connectivity, with the commitment that by 2025 he wants all Londoners to have access to a digital connection, to be able to access a device appropriate to their needs in their own home, and to have access to basic digital training. And that is that's the work through his own delivery programme, but of course also working in partnership with local councils and with providers of training, adult education facilities, libraries, and other points of access, so that people are able to ensure that they get the skills to be able to use the digital equipment that will be made available to them. But just lastly, it's also the point that at any point there's going to be a proportion of Londoners who are not able to make use of digital facilities, and we always have to remember in every service delivery area that we are working in that we have to use the connections of civic society, our voluntary and community sector, and means of communicating with Londoners that aren't all digital, so that we do not leave those people behind who do not have the means to connect with the internet.
Thanks very much, Karen. Louisa, can we hear from you next?
Yes, and another important question. This is something that I'm really passionate about, actually. And as a councillor in Camden, I have often raised the importance of taking into consideration the need to improve digital inclusion for older residents here. Libraries were closed for much of the pandemic, and there are many older residents here in Camden who rely on their libraries simply to be able to use a computer and send an email, and that will be true all over London. So I think it's important that we learn the lessons from that, should we ever be in a situation like this again. Hopefully not, but we've also seen highlighted through the situation we've been in over the last year how it's important to make sure there is access for all, because actually the focus has often been on improving digital access for younger people, for children, rightly, for their education. But it's also important that the older Londoners have access to devices, have access to training in order to be able to use devices, to use services online. And that local councils actually are providing information through other means that aren't just digital. That's something that I've also highlighted here as a councillor, that it's important to make sure that not all services are listed online, even though that's the way the world is going. It isn't an inclusive world for everybody. And it's important to make sure that people can still get information through leaflets, that there's a phone number that they can call up if there's something that they need. So the Mayor has a big role to play actually in working with local boroughs across London to make sure that services are inclusive, that we improve digital skills for all Londoners, and not just younger people, but older people as well. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done with the voluntary sector, in particular community libraries. There is a lot of goodwill out there to make sure that everybody can get the tools that they need. So I think the Mayor has a really important harnessing role to play in ensuring that everyone is included in our recovery, and that's got to include digital inclusion.
Thanks, Louisa. Nickie, can we hear from you about Shaun Bailey's plans to, what's he intend to do in terms of ensuring older Londoners can access the internet?
Certainly, I think it's a really great question and a very important question, because I think, having had conversations with Shaun about this over the last few months, because both our parents, we haven't been able to see our parents, and I know that Shaun's been using the internet with his mum to keep in touch, as I have, and I know many of people watching this Hustings today will have kept in touch with their children and grandchildren via digital access. But I think what the COVID pandemic has shown, and I know what Shaun is very clear, is that there still remains digital poverty in London, and he wants to do all he can to address that. And he has committed to ensuring that all older people do have access to training, to learning the new skills that the digital world offer via the adult education budget, and through libraries or whatever community settings that older people want to go to. We have amazing community hubs for older people across London, and that's where Shaun says he wants to set up even more training. So it is important that we do ensure that older people can keep in contact with their families, but also the whole network that they're used to. But equally, for those who don't have access immediately, that they can still access services through the telephone, or going actually into a physical building if they want to, or the services can come to them. It's a real balance. We have to understand that, as I think one of my fellow participants said earlier, the age from over 50 up until 90, up to 100, it's a very, very different types of ages, and we need the different services that meet each decade, if you like. And I think, having spoken to Shaun, he is determined to ensure that older people, whatever their decade is, whatever their need is, that they will have access to the digital services that they want and need. We need to get more fibre in, super fast fibre, I think it is these days. I can never keep up with the terms, I'm afraid. I've got it going in my street at the moment. You might be able to hear it. And that's going across London now. So it's important that once we get the fibre in, that older people, families, anybody who needs it, can access it, and can access it cheaply, which is also a really important point to make.
Well, thanks, Nickie. And then finally, Shaun, can we hear your response to Elizabeth's question?
Thank you so much. It's such a good question. It's an enormously broad subject. I stood for Mayor of London last time in 2016, and one of the pledges we had to make was that we would appoint a chief digital officer for London to try to work at a strategic level to close these gaps. We do have a chief digital officer for London now, but I think they are really struggling, and this is a legacy of basically setting up this service as a privatized utility. To my mind, digital access is such an important thing for autonomy, for freedom, for access to services, for the ability to just be a fully rounded citizen, that it ought to be a public service provided in public hands. And I think there are opportunities to work on this at London level. Now we have 4G and now 5G coming through, where we can get Wi-Fi through the air. We don't have to fit wires into everyone's home. I think we can provide a level of access for everybody in London through those means. Now, I'm also a big advocate, as you can imagine, as a Green, of repair. I wrote a whole book called Mend It, that's all about repairing things. And I really support the repair economy. And there are excellent charities out there setting up also like community interest companies that are self-sustaining, that repair and redistribute digital devices, and they're great. They're set up by, a lot of the time, by older people who have repairing skills, which are dying out, quite honestly. And those charities are absolutely excellent. I think we can do a lot to recycle, refurbish and redistribute devices to people, so that people have those devices as well for independent access to these services. Now, also, we talked about volunteering. Now, we know that older people are the biggest volunteers. I know this because of my own gran, who was a fantastic volunteer right up until she was like in her 80s. I also work at my local library. We run that through volunteering, and I'm one of the youngest volunteers there in my 40s. Everybody is represented by older Londoners, and those volunteers do also run training. They call it coffee and computers. When we're allowed to get together, they do that kind of thing, and I think that's really important as well. People should be training each other. It shouldn't be paid. It should, it should be a community exercise. So that's just really important. And also, finally, to say, maintaining non-digital options for people who don't have the access, whose devices are broken on those days you need them, is just so important. It's very similar to the way I've been fighting to keep laundrettes. We've all got a washing machine now. Well, actually, not all of us do. About 5% of people don't. But we all have washing machines that break down. We do need laundrettes for people. We do need to make sure that there are non-digital options operating for the people who need it and for the people who are temporarily without. And one thing I've got in my manifesto, which was also really popular, is bringing back and getting rid of the bus countdown things that should tell you when the next bus is coming on the bus stop. These are being removed, and I think we need
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. You're running over a bit.
so that you don't have to get out your phone and have access to Signal in order to find out when the next bus is coming. That's just basic stuff that is being forgotten at the moment.
Thank you very much, Shaun, for that. Lots to talk about on this issue. The next topic that we are moving on to is housing, and we're going to have a question asked by Meg McDonald from Kensington. I think Meg is just being moved to the appropriate part of the Zoom, as it were. I can just see her appearing now.
Oh.
Welcome, Meg. What a great background you've got.
I don't know whether you can see me, but I've lost you. But I'll ask my question anyway. I'm a private renter living in the same flat for a very long time. And my home is in disrepair. My landlord will not address this, and my local authority will not enforce the legislation needed to ensure that my home is fit for habitation. What will you do as mayor to help the many thousands of older renters like myself who live in damp, cold flats, live in fear of eviction and fear of the unaffordable rent increases every 2 years?
Thank you very much, Meg. That's great. Thank you.
I think
Wonderful. So your plans to support older renters. Can we hear first from Louisa?
Yes, absolutely. This is also something I'm passionate about, actually, because I've been a private renter myself. I know what it's like having a dodgy landlord who won't do repairs to your flat. And I even got asked to bear the costs of repairs to my flat once, which I was renting, which is just unbelievable. And this kind of experience is all too common for too many Londoners. So first of all, I'm really sorry that you're going through this. I know how stressful it is, and you shouldn't be put in that position. There are lots of things that need to be done to fix this. First of all, the Lib Dems have a proud record of standing up for private renters and their rights. Caroline Pidgeon has done on the London Assembly. Our MPs and our peers in the House of Lords have led work in this area. We want to do things like ending no-fault evictions, which make it all too easy for landlords to evict renters without giving a reason. And I brought forward a motion on Camden Council, actually, which was adopted cross-party by the council on that, and also led a change of our national policy in this area for the Liberal Democrats. In terms of improving quality, as mayor, I want to set a new standard for housing. It's unacceptable that too many Londoners live in this way. And one of the things that I'll be doing to create new homes is introducing homes in the heart of the city. So converting some of the empty office space that's coming available onto the market into quality, affordable, zero carbon homes. Emphasis on quality there, but also the impact that will have is that it will increase the supply of housing across London and bring down costs for renters like yourself. It will make it much harder for landlords to be able to justify charging such extortionate rents to Londoners, as too many of them often do. And that's also why I'd introduce a London housing company in order to oversee this process and to build directly, and of course work with local councils to improve their delivery, so that you also have options if your landlord is really that appalling, of being able to go elsewhere. So basically we can fix that fundamental imbalance that exists in the market right now, whereby Londoners are often having to accept this relationship where they as renters are put on the back foot, if you like. So there's a lot of things that need to be done, and they need to be done at all levels of government. But I think it's something that the mayor absolutely has to make a priority.
Thanks very much, Louisa. Next, we're going to hear from Nickie on this topic.
Thanks, Abby. Well, obviously, Shaun knows an awful lot about having to sofa surf and not having a secure home. He obviously was brought up in a council house with his mum and family, but then had to sofa surf for quite a few years. So he understands how insecure it can be if you don't have a roof over your head. And one of the big issues that he wants to address is exactly what Meg was highlighting, was some of the appalling conditions that landlords think is acceptable for tenants to live in. And he will be introducing a rogue landlords unit. Will be a specialist unit actually tackling head on this issue that you raised, Meg, because it is unacceptable that anybody has to live in these conditions. He will be working and bringing together boroughs and environmental health officers and also lawyers to ensure that there is a proper understanding of what is acceptable. And if landlords do not reach those high standards, then they will be dealt with. They will be given stronger powers with the local authorities to deal with these landlords head on and ensure that tenants do have a safe and secure and healthy place to live. It's one of the reasons why Shaun is backing the renters reform bill, which the government is hoping to bring in, I'm hoping this year, which I'm hoping will, and Shaun has been pushing, I know, Robert Jenrick, the Secretary of State for Housing, on this, to get rid of that dreadful Section 21, which allows landlords to give absolutely no notice for an eviction or no reason to evict, and gives the tenant no security. So hopefully with Shaun as mayor bringing in his rogue landlords unit, and with the government's renters reform bill, we will be able to give you a lot more security, a lot more confidence, and finally ensure that you have got the home that you deserve.
Great. Thank you, Nickie. Next, Shaun, what would you do to support older renters in London if you were mayor?
Well, thank you so much, Meg, for bringing this up. I mean, I'm a private renter. This is a privately rented flat. I'll be a private renter when I'm an older private renter as well. And I think fundamentally we have to fix the imbalance of power that there is between renters and landlords. At the moment, you don't have the legal ability to enforce good standards. Meg talked about being in fear of eviction. Yes, the government promised almost 2 years ago to get rid of Section 21, which allows for a landlord to ask you to leave without giving a reason, without you doing anything wrong. That hasn't happened yet. It's the easiest bit of legislation to pass. You just cross something out. Hasn't happened yet. And the third thing you need to be able to secure your rights is the removing the threat of a rent hike driving you out. Without rent controls, landlords still have that power over you as well. With those three dominoes fixed in terms of rights, renters would be a lot better off. But we also need more support for councils. Councils currently do not have the capacity to go and enforce against poor standards. They just don't have the staff. They don't have the funding from government. That needs somebody like the Mayor of London, who represents a huge number of renters. We have more renters in London than basically in the rest of the country put together. Our rents are double those in the rest of the country. I would be the mayor that teams up with the mayors of other cities that face these problems, goes to the government and insists that we have more powers, more support and more funding to make sure that renting as a tenure can work, because it ought to be able to do that. One of the things we put forward in this year's budget amendment as Assembly members was for the Mayor of London to get involved in providing good quality, affordable homes, buying them back off landlords, buying them back off people who bought flats that used to be council homes, making them affordable rent. And this plan, again, it got passed by the staff in the finance team in City Hall. It works out. It's perfectly possible to be a landlord, to make a small amount of surplus and not to exploit your tenants. We need to set a good example in City Hall, and that's something I try to do at scale. And it starts from £500 million that's lying unspent in the current mayor's housing budget. We can't be doing that when we've got a housing crisis. This needs somebody who's a renter, somebody who understands the issues, and somebody who's prepared to use every lever there is to start fixing this problem.
Great, thank you, Shaun. And finally, can we hear from Karen?
Thanks very much. Well, we are increasingly a city of private renters. The growth of the private rented sector has been exponential over the last couple of decades, and we are looking to be a city of older private renters, whether we like it or not. And that has absolutely massive implications for older people themselves and the homes that they live in many cases not being able to carry out adaptations, for example, if they are necessary, but also for the housing benefit budget, which was not designed for this purpose. So we need to catch up very quickly with the reality of what needs to be done to cope with this. Now, I'm personally quite invested in this. I actually helped brought about the change in the rent controls for assured tenants, that is the old protected tenants category that the pre-88 Act, and also introduced the Fitness for Human Habitation legislation to actually ensure that tenants have got legal rights to be able to enforce against their landlords when their homes are not fit to occupy. And it was one of those reasons that Sadiq asked me to lead a group to look at private renters in the capital, including the case for rent controls. And we produced our report 2 years ago now. As Nickie said, the government have said that they want to bring in legislation to enact some of these changes, but it is well over 2 years since that was first flagged up, and some of it was on the back of the Grenfell tragedy. We need those legislative changes brought in. We need to give tenants legal protection against no fault, so-called no fault eviction. We need to strengthen their rights in terms of decency, and we need to give them assurances in terms of affordability. All of that is in the government's gift. Sadiq wants to have the powers to introduce rent controls, but that is something the government has to provide, and he wants to register so that we know who the landlords are. But finally, of course, we know that the private sector will not be suitable for many older Londoners, as it isn't for many younger families either. And that means the provision of options, a range of options in particularly social housing that is secure and affordable. Sadiq built 17,000 genuinely affordable homes in the last year, and more council homes than any year since '83, but we have to have government support for that. The government's building programme for London for 4 years was what we need every single year to be able to build the homes that we need for Londoners. So that is a package of proposals that Sadiq is supporting and taking forward, but the government have to step up and they have to fund a housing programme that actually meets the needs of Londoners.
Thank you very much, Karen. And at this moment, I do want to do a small shameless plug for a piece of work that AGK London did on making renting age friendly. If anyone's interested in reading more, we've got some resources and some reports on our website. Our next question is a question relating to health, and we're going to hear from Asmina Ramtullah, who lives in Barnet, and beautifully on cue. Welcome, Asmina.
Good afternoon, everybody. How will you ensure that older Londoners who might need support accessing nutritional food, such as those that have recently left hospital, can access at least one good meal per day? How will you support boroughs to provide sustainable services, such as Meals on Wheels, offering high quality meals? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asmina. So what would you do about ensuring access to high quality food? Nickie, can we hear from you first? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was trying to be good then. Well, first of all, I think I'm right in saying that Shaun has worked as a Meals on Wheels driver and deliverer. So I think he will know exactly how important providing nutritious hot meals for older people is, particularly those who need them when they're coming out of hospital. So I think, Asmina, you are absolutely right to ask this question. I think it's about working with local authorities to ensure that they know who the older people are that need the help, and also ensuring that they have the funding that's available. Now, I know that Shaun has been talking to Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, about his plans, major plans to change the social care offer in this country. We do need to have a fundamental review, well, not review, we need to get on with it. We've had enough reviews of social care, and we really do need to now start looking at how we do provide the services for older people, because we know that people are living longer, that they have different needs as they grow older. We do need to shake up the care system, and Shaun will look at working with local authorities and the government to ensure that Londoners of all ages, but particularly older ones, and particularly the elderly. I think there's a huge difference between older Londoners and elderly Londoners. And as you say, Asmina, when you leave hospital, you do need that extra care. You also need to have the freedom to choose what services you want and when you want them, rather than be dictated to. And Shaun will ensure that older people have that voice and do get the services when they want them and how they want them, and ensure that you do have the nutritious meals, and also the understanding of how you can get more services, not just from local authorities, but from community and volunteer groups. Because as my participants have said today, what we've learnt during COVID is that there's so many people out there who want to help, and part of Shaun's plan will be to bring those volunteers together, to have a network of London volunteers to help and support people like you and people who do need extra care or extra help at a time when they really do need it. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you, Nickie. Shaun, what would you do if you were mayor in terms of ensuring access to good, high quality food for older Londoners?
Well, thank you so much for this question. I think the coronavirus crisis has shown us just how precarious a lot of people's access to food really is, and how it's been allowed to become more precarious through cuts and cuts and cuts. Now, what we did in my local ward in Camden, me and Louisa are both Camden councillors, so you get loads of examples from Camden here. But basically, in our local ward, we had a community centre that was providing lunch clubs and cheap lunches on Mondays and Fridays, really excellent events where lots of people came together. Obviously, in the coronavirus, this closed down. They became essentially a Meals on Wheels type service. They became a food bank, and we as local councillors managed to get the council to agree to let us use our community infrastructure levy budget to help support this. And this is money that comes from local developers, and you spend it on community infrastructure, and we managed to convince the council that this was community infrastructure. Now we'll keep funding this for as long as we possibly can. But what is exposed is a need, a long-term need for these things to carry on, to be able to be brought to people's homes, as well as when in the community centres when we get back open again. And this is so important. And there's a really good report that's come from, and I'm going to find it now, from Trust for London and Sustain about Meals on Wheels in London. And it shows how patchy the service is, how it's a bit like youth centres, which I work on as well. I get this data together for youth centres, and you can see that youth services have been cut back in some boroughs more than others. The squeeze isn't affecting everybody equally. And the same is true for Meals on Wheels. We need a consistent, good service, guaranteeing people a good meal absolutely every single day, and that means making it a statutory responsibility of councils, and from that then funding will come from national government. Similarly, social prescribing by doctors, once that is better established, funding for the services that can be socially prescribed, like food services, like other things to help with loneliness and isolation and mental health, those services, funding for those services will follow. Ultimately, we need a mayor who's prepared to put together a plan for stronger communities, so that we've got people poised to help in these situations, people who will notice when somebody needs help, people who will work together and campaign for changes in the law like this. And this is something I'm absolutely passionate about, having been a councillor, having been a London Assembly member, having seen how things are not the same all across London. You need someone who's prepared to uphold standards and help people to help themselves right across the city. So I hope you'll vote for me to help me to do more of this stuff. It really, really matters.
Thanks, Shaun. And now over to Karen. Can you tell us what Sadiq's plan would be for ensuring good access to high quality food for older
Thanks very
Londoners?
much. I will, although I just want to start by saying that if Shaun Bailey was driving for Meals on Wheels, he'll be very well aware that one of the things that has happened to us in recent years has been the wiping out of Meals on Wheels services in local authorities, including the local authority that Nickie and I both represent as members of Parliament, Westminster, who effectively wound up their Meals on Wheels service a couple of years ago.
They changed the choices. They didn't round it up, they changed it.
Excuse me, this is
changed it with extreme prejudice to virtually no one getting it, and you know, this is an issue of resource, and it also kind of feeds into the wider issue of social care, where 11 years in we are still waiting for a social care programme, and London local authorities estimate they have a £540 million gap, or are facing a £540 million gap in social care funding for older Londoners. But as we all agree, there was something extraordinary happened in the early stages of the COVID crisis when Londoners volunteered to deliver food and showed the scale of what was needed. And I was doing that myself. And there's always going to be in any system a role for, a welcome for people who are doing voluntary and community, hyper-local community activity, supporting their neighbours in these things. And I think that's fantastic. And Sadiq has been supporting that in a number of ways, including the £11 million that went into the London community response to COVID, and the Thrive London programme, and supporting 53 London community food hubs, I think some of which are shared or working with the Age UK branches in the London boroughs, and so that is a programme that rolls forward and supports the means by which the community will help to ensure that food is delivered to those who need it. But ultimately, there is also a wider question of food poverty. There are some people who need support to get a hot meal because their disability or health problem, for example, means that they have difficulty in cooking, and that's one thing. But we cannot live in a city where food poverty is a reality, and a growing reality, as we've seen evidenced in the growth of food banks alongside and even before the coronavirus crisis. And that is a result of Londoners not having the money to be able to heat their homes and feed themselves in a way that they need to. And that is something, again, that we have to ensure that we are standing up to the government and demanding that Londoners, poor Londoners, are supported financially to be able to make those choices themselves. And I'm all in favour of a levelling up agenda, and I'm all in favour of London supporting London's economy, supporting those parts of the country that need extra help. It's absolutely the right thing to do. But we have a real problem of low-income Londoners of all age groups, including older Londoners, and they need support. They need to be able to be advised and supported to get pension credit where they're not applying for it. They need to be supported, those younger, older Londoners who fall into that category of people in their 50s and 60s who've lost their jobs perhaps and are struggling to make ends meet. And that is something we are absolutely essential that we lobby the government for. So a community response, yes, a general income food poverty strategy as well, and lobbying for local authorities to have the money to run a proper
I'd have to ask you to wind up there. Thank you very much. There's a lot to say on all of these topics. And last but no means least, Louisa, can we hear from you?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Azmina, for your question. I mean, the pandemic has really shone a light on how many Londoners are facing food poverty and issues accessing food across the board, all age groups. But I'm really glad that Meals on Wheels has been mentioned today, because actually Lib Dem run Sutton Council is one of only 3 councils in London that's managed to keep Meals on Wheels, because they know how vital these services are. And it's really proven its worth during the pandemic, helping people to get discharged from hospital faster and reducing the demand on care workers needing to visit people in their homes. And of course, supporting people to live as independently as possible. All councils are obviously facing funding constraints, and I fully support that they should be getting more money from central government. But I also think that all councils, even in these constrained times, should be making it a priority. And so as Mayor, I would be encouraging all councils across the capital to follow Sutton's lead on this, because it's so critical for the people who need it. As I've mentioned, food poverty is such a massive issue for so many Londoners now. We need concrete solutions to this. And one of the things that I support is the introduction of a universal basic income, which would stop Londoners being faced with decisions like, can I afford to eat today? It's about dignity. In fact, that's been the theme of what we've been talking about today generally. And having a universal basic income, some money that comes from the state that allows people to meet their basic living costs, including being able to buy food, would go a long way to solving this problem. No one should be worrying about whether they can eat. On social care, the Lib Dems have long supported the introduction of a penny on the pound of income tax to fund the NHS and social care for the long term. We need a plan for that as well. And in terms of the mayor's role, I think that we also need a lessons learned exercise off the back of what's happened in the pandemic. And the mayor should make it a priority to organise a conference of all councils across London to share best practice of what they learn about access to food from the pandemic, because Age UK has played a really leading role in this across many London boroughs, and there's a lot that can be learned from that experience.
Great. Thank you very much, Louisa. And just before we move on to the next question, I wanted to highlight, in case anyone hadn't seen it, that there's some good discussion going on in the chat, and also people are putting in links to various resources, so do have a look in there if you want to access some of the documents and reports that people have been mentioning. The next question is on transport, and we're going to hear this from Celia Coburn, who lives in Camden. Celia, over to you.
Thank you. Will you lift the current suspension on the use of the 60+ Oyster card and the Freedom Pass before 9 a.m. on weekday mornings? If so, when?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Celia. So, Shaun, can we hear your response to that question first?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd have agreed in the first place to removing it. I mean, we've been in an awful situation for the whole of this year. I mean, due to absolutely essential public health reasons, people were not travelling by public transport, and that took away so much of Transport for London's income. And that is nothing to do with London or the mayor. Quite honestly, the gap could never have been filled, even with some of the things that are in my manifesto about making Transport for London's income more diverse through doing things like more housing, through doing things like smarter, fairer road charging. That would have made up some of the difference, but not all of it. And I think it's outrageous that the government, this benefit, having an over 60s Freedom Pass, is something London does for its people. It's something we have the right to do, and for the government to make it a condition of their bailouts for us to do this in the first place is outrageous, and we should all be up in arms about this. It has to come back as soon as possible. We have to make a long-term deal with the government to restore our operating grants. It is absolutely ridiculous that we are the only major city in probably the whole world that doesn't have an operating grant to help us run decent public transport, something that's good for all of us. And it's especially good for older people and younger people to be able to access public transport for free. I just believe so much in that, and this is something we should be able to do. So yes, we need a new mayor who's going to work with the government to put together a deal that actually works for London, and I'd be committing to put more effort into raising money in different ways. But I'm not going to say that we're going to keep this benefit away from our over 60s. It's absolutely wrong. So yeah, vote for me, and we will get a decent long-term deal out of Transport out of the government for Transport for London. The only reason they're holding this up, the only reason they're giving us short-term deals again and again is because of this election, and is for political reasons. And to my mind, I'm absolutely disgusted with the government about that. We just needed to be supported in London, like the train operating companies have been supported in the rest of the country. And the fact that it hasn't been done, the fact that this is still a political football that's being kicked around at these hustings, and you'll hear it on the telly. It's wrong. We need to have good public services supported by government, and that's what I will fight for.
Thanks very much, Shaun. I could see a few heads nodding at that moment. Karen, can we hear from you on this topic?
Thanks very much. Well, I'll pick up at the end of that, because I think the comparison with the National Rail Network is really striking in all of this. The National Rail Service, like London Transport, saw fare income fall off a cliff. They saw levels of passenger travel fall by 90% plus. It's recovered to some extent, but absolutely far away from full ridership. And the bailout that was done for the national rail companies did not have the kinds of strings attached that were imposed on London. And we saw those strings attached. We saw the proposal set out for extending the congestion charge and for the removal of the concessionary fares for over 60s, and then for under 18s, and for increasing the fares and other measures that were put in as conditions on London Transport that did not apply to the national rail network. And Sadiq had to fight against those, and indeed the government then tried to kind of pretend that those weren't conditions, and there was a whole kind of row about that, and it eventually emerged that those conditions were actually written into a letter from the Transport Secretary. So Sadiq has fought for and restored the funding for the under 18s and for the over 60s, but as the question suggested, there's still a restriction on travel. So we know that we are going to have to fight for a good deal for London Transport when the next set of negotiations come up. That was delayed from before the election till May, and we can expect a really tough fight again to make sure that we get the level of funding that is necessary to make sure that London Transport can operate, continue to operate safely, and work to make sure, because the London economy and London society and our connection with our loved ones and our families and our friends and our good times are all dependent upon being able to get that rail network, that London Transport network working efficiently and at full strength. And that means, for the time being, a continued commitment from the government to make sure that they are funding us fully. So I would like to, obviously, I want to see our concessions maintained, preserved, and Sadiq will continue to fight for them. And we want and demand that the government give us a fair funding deal to allow that to happen.
Thank you, Karen. Now over to you, Louisa. Would you lift the morning suspension of the over 60s Oyster card and Freedom Pass?
Short answer to the question, yes, absolutely. But I'll say a little bit more as well, which is that our Assembly member, Caroline Pigeon, who represents the Liberal Democrats in the London Assembly, has also called for train franchises to be devolved so that the suburban rail services that many Londoners also use are run by TfL. And this would mean that there'd be a genuine freedom pass for all Londoners wherever they live, available 24 hours a day. So there are some other reforms needed as well to improve inclusion of this. The Freedom Pass is a long-standing entitlement and it should be in place. There's been some discussion about the politics surrounding TfL in the last year, so I'd like to just quickly say something about that as well, which is that I fully agree that the government should have stepped in this emergency situation to support our public transport network. They have given guarantees to private rail companies outside of London throughout the pandemic, and it's wrong that we are being treated differently because of this government's anti-London agenda. On the other hand, I do think that the mayor could improve his negotiating hand, and maybe this is something the next mayor can do, by putting forward a plan as well for how to put TfL's finances on a more sustainable footing. So I support the introduction of a road pricing scheme. Incidentally, I think this is an area where the government and the mayor could work well together, because the Chancellor has previously said that he would potentially like to see this rolled out nationwide. So as mayor, I would be saying that London should be put forward to trial this road pricing scheme. And there's research that's been done by an independent think tank, Centre for London, that shows that this could not just help meet the existing costs of TfL, but also free up more money to invest in our public transport, so that we don't end up in a situation like this again, whereby things like removing the Freedom Pass and free travel for under 18s are put as conditions on the table. It's appalling and would increase inequality in our city. So we need to move away from that, both with some short-term support from the government, but also a long-term plan from the mayor.
Thanks, Louisa. And finally, Nickie, can we hear from you about Shaun Bailey's position on this issue?
Yes, Abby, Shaun would absolutely reintroduce the Freedom Pass at all times, not just the current times that the current mayor has established. But I think this question is an excellent one, because it goes to the heart of what Londoners need in a transport system, and the type of mayor it needs to ensure that it has a fit transport system moving forward. As everybody has said this afternoon, London needs a transport network that is working for Londoners, so we can go about our work, we can go to school, we can go to college, we can catch up with friends and family. But it was £12 billion in the debt before COVID even happened. And it goes back to the absolute mismanagement of TfL under this current mayor, who made too many promises he couldn't keep. Crossrail is being delayed and delayed and delayed. It's cost an extra £5 billion. It is still not up and running. We still do not really know when it's going to be up and running. Think of the loss in fares, not only the extra cost, but also the loss in fares that Londoners are now having to pay for. Sadiq Khan has cut buses. He's cut buses in outer London, where people don't have the same access to tube and rail networks as much as we do in inner London. And that is hitting more of the older people, more poorer people. It's just time and time again, I think TfL has proven that it needs better management under the mayor. It needs to have a complete overhaul of its finances. You know, my fellow participants today have said that the government has stepped in. Well, I don't know what £3 billion over the last 9 months to help bail out Mayor Khan and TfL. If that's not help, I don't know what is. And they've just secured an extra just announced more money for TfL up until the election, because we're going into, well, we're in Purdah now. You can't provide more money until we know who the next mayor is. But it's going to cost Londoners more in fares. It's going to mean more cuts to services because of this mismanagement. And I would love the next mayor, and Shaun has promised to do that, he will look at how much pensions are being paid into TfL's pension fund. Over 30% contribution to TfL workers, where nurses the NHS contributes 19% to nurses, police officers, and everything like that. So I'll just conclude by saying, yes, the Freedom Pass of all times will be reintroduced, but it's not just about that. It's about the full management of TfL is being woeful under this current mayor, and it's a stain on London. It really is.
Okay, thank you, Nickie. I think we heard a whole range of views there. So we've come to the end of the question sessions here, and there were just 2 things that I wanted to reflect on in terms of themes that it felt like were coming out through the discussion that I was really pleased to hear. The first was the theme of services and policies that really give dignity to older Londoners. And the other thing I was really pleased to hear was the acknowledgement of the diversity of experiences of older Londoners, and that being a 55-year-old living in this city obviously gives you a very different experience to being a 95-year-old. I'm now going to ask each of our panelists to make a short 1-minute closing statement, and I will start waving at you if you go over 1 minute. So that's your indication that you're running out of time. Karen, can I invite you to go first, please?
I mean, it's not long, is it? London's an amazing city. We draw our strength from our incredible diversity of people, and that includes older Londoners, the whole range of older Londoners with all of their different experiences. Older Londoners are contributing, working, volunteering, working in all sorts of different ways, not just enjoying retirement or hoping to enjoy retirement in the city. And we have to adapt increasingly to a city that includes a growing older population in so many ways. The future cannot look like the past, particularly now post-COVID. That has to be recognised, and more changes have to be made. We have to build a fairer and a greener city. We'll all say that, but Sadiq Khan is a mayor who spent the last 5 years delivering in tough conditions to make that all possible. We cannot go back to the kind of squeeze that we've had on our budgets, the billion out of policing, the squeeze on council budgets, if we're going to deliver for the future. We have a mayor who loves London, who stands up for London's values, who stands up for London's communities, who delivers on all of the areas of public policy that fall within his remit, and will continue to do so. We will be bringing forward a manifesto in which we will set out the specific proposals for the future. But you have a mayor who is a champion for London, has demonstrated it, and that I am proud to be supporting and calling friend.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Karen. Next up, we're going to hear from Louisa.
Thank you very much, Abby, and thank you to all the participants who've come with such interesting and engaging, important questions today. There has been a theme of dignity and decency running throughout these discussions. Human rights has been at the centre of all of this. Access to food, toilets, transport, and decent housing. And I'm the only candidate with a proper plan to tackle this specifically. Jobs, homes, clean air, these are 3 basic needs of Londoners. And on decent, affordable housing, I'm afraid we are being let down. The mayor has a poor record in this area. He's had 5 years in office and record grants from the government, but only started half of the homes that he promised in 2016. And I've got a plan that will actually increase the supply of housing in London and finally tackle the affordability crisis that's been going on for too long. London's an inclusive city. We need to meet the basic needs of all Londoners so that they can participate in our recovery beyond the pandemic. It's exposed too many inequalities. I have a plan to take London forward, so vote for me if you want real change for our city.
Thank you, Louisa. And next, Nickie.
Thank you. Yeah, you can hear me, sorry. Thank you, Abby, and thank you to my fellow participants today, who I think, as an all-woman panel, I think we've done very well. And thank you to all the questioners. Very excellent questions, which have gone to the heart of what we need for London. For over half a decade, I think we've been let down by the current mayor. Crime is up. We do not have enough of the affordable homes he promised. Our transport network is on its knees and is not going to improve under this current mayor. I think what we've heard today is that we love our city. We love London. We all do, whatever our age, whether we are 8, 18 or 80 and even older. And we deserve to have a London that we can all share in, we can be proud of, and we can prosper with together. A vote for the current mayor is a vote for more of the same, more of the same failure, and a vote for Shaun Bailey is a fresh start to build a city that works for all Londoners, whatever our age, whatever our background. We need a fresh start, and that's Shaun Bailey.
Thank you, Nickie. And finally, can we hear from Shaun?
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to all the questioners too. The problems that you've raised are so much the problems that I've heard and worked on through my 5 years on the London Assembly. And I hope you've seen today that the Greens have good ideas, that we work hard all year round and that we get things done. And I hope you agree that the New Start London needs should be a green start. We need that green recovery that lifts everyone up, that closes those gaps, that involves everyone and truly values our older generations. Our manifesto is out next week. Please read it. There's fresh thinking for housing, a clear plan to keep London moving, to make our streets work for everyone, action for a safe and healthy city, a mission to transform our economy, and plans to create the greenest city in the world. For our elders, I will make sure you have a voice. From poverty to lack of appropriate care to inaccessible transport and loneliness, I want to remove every single barrier to older people leading fulfilling lives in London. And I want to work with you to celebrate the amazing contributions older people make too. We can do better. So please vote Green for Mayor and Assembly to say loud and clear you want better for London. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shaun, and thank you to all of our panelists. So now all that remains for me to do is to draw this event to a close with a couple of very quick thank yous. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for giving their time to come today to listen to Old Londoners and for their thoughtful answers. I'd like to thank our questioners, John Miles, Elizabeth Edibisi, Meg MacDonald, Asmina Remtula, and Celia Coburn. I'd also like to thank everyone who submitted questions in advance of the event. We were delighted to receive so many, and although we could only have answers to 5 today, we have asked the candidates if they would be really willing to respond to some more additional ones in writing, and we hope to be able to share their responses on the website over the next few weeks. Also on our website is information on how to register to vote if you're not yet registered, and how to apply for a postal vote if you prefer not to vote in person this time round. And finally, my last thank you goes to all of you for attending, and in attending showing that the next Mayor of London must listen to the views and experience of older Londoners and take action to make London a more age-friendly city. Thank you all very much for coming, and goodbye.